One of the finishing touches I'll put on any composition is finishing it up and determining its color and also its typography. But I'm going to talk about color in this presentation. It can be intimidating to start with. I know it was for me. Like, how many main ask Google, how many main colors are there? 11, 16, 24, 10. We might have been exposed to a history of color study, and we're familiar with the color wheel, and all of that's really useful information that's been done by scientists and artists analyzing color. We might have been introduced to different color schemes like complementary, analogous, etc. I might know that colors are warm or cool. I might be aware of the fact that there are optical illusions based on what color goes with what, studies by Joseph Albers and others, and of course, most recently, the blue or white dress. There's plenty of resources for color that are the guides to color. This is a series that we've got in the conference room library, Designer's Guide to Colors 1 through 5. These are basically swatches. I don't know that they're guides. It's kind of like if I'm looking for a color palette, I could find it. I could find that at Color Lovers. And of course, Adobe Color has a huge resource of color palettes that I can choose from just to get started. But what do I do with them? That's what I want to address in this video. There are a variety of ways that I can go about it. I'm not going to get too much into these kind of things, triadic, etc. I'm just going to talk about how I think about color when I'm applying them in a composition. I don't think of millions of colors. I think there's 6 basic colors and variations of them, or maybe there's only 3 colors. Or maybe there are these 3 colors. Or maybe there's only 2 kinds of colors. Depending on my scenario, I might think of color as having 6 or 3 or 2. And hopefully that'll make a little more sense after you get to the end of this. These are the basic steps that I'll go through, starting with 0. If your composition isn't working, color won't fix it. There'll be I have some subtle examples and possibly some drastic changes that you can make to existing compositions and see how you might get color to work for you and stop feeling intimidated by it and feel more like you've got control over it. If your composition isn't working to begin with, color won't fix it. So regardless of where you want the viewer's eye to enter, you should have a focal point of some kind. Maybe there's a couple. But think about how the viewer's eye flows through your composition from one element to the next. How do you intentionally move the viewer's eye around the page of your composition and get them to keep flowing through and around? So the first step is to get the composition to work. Now, working with black and white, we've always got the possibility of having a composition that's mostly black, one that's mostly white, or one that's about half and half. So if I look at some examples, here's an example of each of those 3. And if I can work with black and white, I can design in a variety of media. There's some book covers, there's some packaging, here's a website, even exhibition graphics. And so if you understand how to design with black and white and nothing else, the design is going to work. But if your composition isn't working, the color isn't going to fix it. This one might seem obvious, but I feel like I have to say it because sometimes people forget and try to use color in a way that isn't necessarily the best. So black is always going to be the darkest dark. White is going to be the brightest light. When it comes to dealing with colors of light, white is all of the wavelengths of light at the same time, and black is absence of light. So there will be no darker or lighter. And anything in between, whether it's gray in whatever variety, or whether it's a color, is always going to be between those 2. I can have a very bright fluorescent yellow, and sometimes people think that's brighter than white. It is not. White is brighter than whatever color you're putting on the page. And any one of these colors can be the foreground and any can be the background. So if I'm dealing with a 3, black and white, and a 3rd color, remember that any of them can be the background or the foreground. Again, that might seem obvious, but a lot of people start with a blank white page in Illustrator or in Photoshop and feel like that has to be the background color. It does not. Any color can be the background, and any color is always going to be a mid-tone value between black and white. If there's one single piece of advice I'd give you on working with color in your compositions, it's this. Think about the volume of color in your composition, not the color of the objects. What does that mean? Well, all of the theory about color is nice, understanding that warm and cool colors are different things, thinking about complementary and analogous color schemes is useful maybe. But once I've got all these swatches from Adobe Color and Color Lovers and places like that, and it can be overwhelming until I get that color applied to my composition. So if I'm working with black and white compositions, I can have a composition that's mostly black, mostly white, and about half and half. And the simplest way to start working with color is to take a black and white composition and add color in some way, shape, or form, right? And I can think about how much of that color that I'm adding is taking up the composition. That's what I mean by volume. So this is still mostly a white composition. I've got about a half and half here with white and blue, and this is still mostly black with blue as just my accent that's applied in one place. It doesn't really matter what color I add to black and white. Black is going to be the darkest, white is going to be the brightest. I just want to think about how am I using that color? What's my dominant color? What's my secondary color that I use quite a bit of, but not as much as the dominant? And then what's my accent color? What do I use for calling attention to little details or just use sparingly? It doesn't really matter which color is my dominant, which is my secondary, or which is my accent, as long as I think about the volume of application of each of those. And once I've got that idea down, I can choose black, white, and any color and make a composition work. As long as I've got a dark, mid-tone, and a light, any one of them can be dominant or secondary. Any one of them can be the accent. It works really well for me to think about it this way. And again, once I've got that established, right, so here are two different hierarchies in terms of which color is dominant and which is secondary, but because it's black white or black light and the third color, it kind of doesn't matter what color the third color is. The color is used to change the tone or the attitude. So I might have a hot pink or a cool blue, and the composition still works equally well. It's just what mood am I using the color to set. If the composition works in black and white, it will work with that added color. As long as I've got a dark, a mid-tone, and a light, I can think in terms of volume by applying my dominant color, which takes up the most volume, secondary color, and accent color, and that's usually going to give me a good composition with 3 different colors: dark, mid-tone, and light. Okay, so color by volume works with 3 colors, but Adobe Color gives me all these 5 color swatches. What do I do with those? The same principle. If I look at this one swatch from the Adobe Color page, it's telling me that there's a blue here, which I can see, and a dark blue I see in that water. There's this aqua that's in the sky and some of the reflections. It doesn't include a gray for the rocks. It's got the pink, which is obvious, and a red that I do not see, but it might be on a phone here. I definitely do see a cream color, which I would add to the mix as part of the composition. And if I were going to do a volume map of this photo, it would be something like this. Still dominant color, accent color, and secondary color pink. And you might be thinking, but Jeff, what about these other 2 blues? Well, blue is the dominant color, but blue is not a color, right? So I can start with 1 color swatch, and if I go to the swatch map, I can find probably somewhere down here is where that blue is. But blue is not a single color. Blue is a range of colors. And I can make multiple blues part of my dominant color rather than just leaving it to be 1. Either way, it's still working with color by volume rather than color by object. If you've been in class with me, you've probably heard me say at least part of this in person. It's good to work with a dark, a midtone, and a light, but your dark color doesn't have to be black. Black always can be my darkest color, but sometimes I can get a feeling of color sophistication if I have a dark color that isn't black. So adding brown here gets a little feeling of antiquity and history. If I change this to a deep dark red, I've got some warm color and cool color working together, so it gets that dynamic happening. Even if I go to a dark navy blue, now it's blue throughout the composition, and I've got my dark lights and midtones all in that blue range. I could also try just stepping to the side of the color wheel and going into purple from blue. You see this less than 20 or less than 30% brightness, less than 50% saturation, so there's a lot of gray, a lot of dark in it, but I have a dark composition that doesn't use black as my deepest dark. And just like black doesn't have to be my dark color, light colors that aren't white can also present some good opportunities in your composition. Working with white and two colors that are relatively bright can lead to compositions that might become stark. They can be striking, but sometimes I want to go for a softer feel, and the best way I can do that is to add a color that's a neutral, that's not white. I can start with a gray, and the gray can be really faint, as you see here. It allows me to let things that are white become a little more visible, push them to the foreground as I get a little darker here into the grays. Maybe that's too much. But just a little gray can help soften that, even though it's not, it's light, but it's not white. And I can also go into, this is where you get beiges that work, so I can get a cream, I can get a very light green, I can get taupe, right? Taupe, really just a gray that has a little bit of green in it. You see the saturation is way down on this, 3%, the brightness is really high. It's green, but you wouldn't know it by looking at it. I can also get into the oranges, and that gets me into like tan beige and even really light blue. So there's ways to get light colors that soften the starkness of a composition without detracting from the overall color of the composition. In terms of practical application, working with color in Photoshop or in Illustrator, the color mode you're working in can be really helpful. So CMYK, RGB, spot color are important things to know about. CMYK is what's used in printing. Anybody who has a color printer at home has probably seen these cartridges or something like them. It's used in offset printing, but it's got some limitations on color. We can't get a lot of oranges with process color, as it's called. CMYK is also referred to as process color, four-color process. RGB, most people know, is the colors of light. So anything that's designed for screens is going to be in RGB values, and even some CSS code specifies RGB, although more commonly it'll be hexadecimal values that are just two digits that equate to the values for red, green, and blue. Finally, there's spot color, and that's basically just here's the specific color of the ink, where you might get into fluorescence and metallics, but it's one color of ink that goes on. It's also the only place where we've got white as an ink color. That doesn't usually happen in a process printing, so anytime you see white, it's usually screen printed, and it's usually spot color. But when I open my color picker in Photoshop or Illustrator, you might see something like this. I almost never use it this way. I look more closely at the hue, saturation, and brightness, this HSB values, hue, saturation, and brightness, and almost exclusively the hue. And let's take a look at how I do that in Illustrator. One concept in working with color that's been helpful for me is to just accept the fact that there are only 6 colors. and these are it. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Everything else is some variation of those. Okay, yeah, you could argue that maybe pink is a color, but it's really just red with a lot of brightness, leaning towards purple. We could call teal a color. We've given that another blue-green. We've given that a name. And maybe lime green, but lime green is still just green, right? So for the most part, these are the 6 colors. And then everything else I do from this is just a derivation of these colors, either adding black or removing brightness, or removing saturation and getting it closer to gray. So if I add another stack of each of these things, I can see what I mean. So for starters, if I go to the swatches, I have some colors to pick from. If I go to the color up here, they're always going to be there also. But I don't really get much ability to change these things until I go to the color picker. And that I get to by double clicking on the fill color. And here is what I use almost exclusively for color. I can change the hue to anywhere in here. I can also change the, let me cancel out here. I can change the saturation, so I can go to gray or gray with a little red in it. I can go down to dark red and black. And with any of the warm colors, I can get browns. So if I take the saturation down below 50% and the brightness down below 50%, I'm going to end up with a color that we're probably going to call brown, right? With orange, I get lots of browns. I don't have to go very far to get brown. With orange, I can get a grayish brown. Most of my browns are going to come in that orange range. In the yellows, I can also get, well, is it brown or is it what? Is it gold? Is it what my previous boss referred to as baby poop green? Up to you to decide, but I get browns from the warm colors. I can get grays also, right? So I can go into the gray and get a gray out of this, but I'm going to get brown from the warms. From the cool colors, I will not get brown. I will get dark green. I will get a grayish green, but I don't think we'd call that brown. I can get gray, right? So I can go down into those grays and get into taupe, which is what we get with green. Blue can get me to dark blue or gray, and purple, same thing. Purple stays purple a long time, so even if I get it dark, still seems like it's purple, and then I get into a gray that might have purple tendencies. But all of the colors that I might work with are going to be warm colors or cool colors, and some combination of these 6, even if they start with pink. See, watch this. Pink is really just red with a lot of white in it, or red that leans towards that purple end of the spectrum, and now we get pink. But working with hue, saturation, and brightness lets me control the dark and lights of all of these 6 colors. My final tip, I'm just going to call it stomp on it, warm it up, or cool it down. It's a way of taking control of the color if you feel like the whole thing is out of control, and just trying a couple things to bring it back. I'm in Illustrator, so I can do 3 different images at once, but this works the same in Photoshop. I have 3 compositions that I did not make here, and if I want to test and see what they might look like in different colors, I can do that pretty quickly with some limitations, right? I can't make darker colors lighter, but I can make the colors change using different blend modes. So what's going on here? Well, I've got just a simple color here, and you can see here the original posters. So I've got a single color, and I'm just using the blend modes, and in this case I'm using hue or color. These will have slightly different effects, but they both achieve similar results in that I can put an overlay of a solid color on top of something that's white, and using hue or color, it will not add color to that white part. Multiply will do that. So if I want to make the blending mode multiply, that gets a little muddy and it doesn't really stomp on the color the way that hue and color will do. I'm kind of, if I was at the point where I felt like these colors were all too busy and I'm not sure what to do and I just want to strip it down and make it simple, I can do that. But I think these have all managed pretty well. This is predominantly blue but added warm colors, so there's the warm it up, right? If your composition is mostly cool colors, try adding a warm color. Orange, red, pink if you must, yellow, and even white. So this is predominantly blue, predominantly cool colors with a little bit of warm. This is about half and half, cool and warm, and this is mostly warm with just a little bit of cool colors in there. So thinking about how you choose to incorporate warm and cool colors, and also if your photos feel like they're all over the place, you can just throw one color over top of them, use the blend modes, and see how you like it in a different hue as your starting point.